Hello everyone, welcome back to the never-ending collection video set. This time we're actually going to go down to my Genesis collection, which I should really say is my Genesis Mega Drive collection for the most part, as we'll see here. Just as a side note, you'll see a lot of boxes in order to start off with, just because in general, because of the way they set up the cases for the Genesis games, they were a lot easier to keep a hold of because people generally thought it was more of the packaging and thought more value of it, instead of the cardboard boxes that most normal NES games and Super Nintendo games at the time came in. So people tended to keep these ones a lot more. So I have a lot more in-case games. Starting off from the top, we have Disney's Aladdin. Generally speaking, this and the Super Nintendo version were actually made by two different companies off the top of my head. Both of them actually play really well. Just excuse me as I'm getting a more comfortable position for this. Both of them play very well. In terms of which game is better, that's really more personal preference than anything else. Altered Beast is the next one on here. I believe this actually came with some systems back in the day. As you can see also from the basic design here, definitely one of the early Genesis titles because of the kind of a line pattern on the side there. Yes, indeed, there is a Battletoads Genesis port. Kind of curious port. It does fix a lot of issues that were with the original Super Nintendo version, or I should say the normal Nintendo Entertainment System version, the North American version, but introduces a bunch of quirks on its own, but we'll discuss it another day, probably with Wizar once we work out the scheduling issues for that. Battletoads Double Dragon. Basically a sequel to the original Battletoads games, as close to an official sequel as you're going to get, really. Nice game, has some troublesome parts, honestly not that bad though. Bulls vs. Blazers and the NBA playoffs. Honestly, one of the few straight-up sports games that I happen to have in my collection. Not bad overall, at least from what I remember. It's been a while since I played that one. Comic Zone. Honestly, interesting little beat-em-up. Can't go wrong there. It really, if you're looking for that one, try to find the right price for it. Speaking of the right price, Contra Hard Corps. A little funny story about that one is the North American version of the game is actually more difficult than the Japanese version because the Japanese version actually gave you a few hits, basically a few hearts per life, which they changed over the English version, so it basically back to your standard one-hit kill. Forgotten Worlds, a nice little arcade game from Capcom there. The board isn't too bad, although generally speaking the control scheme leaves a little bit to work with. At least based off what the original arcade sticks had. Maximum Carnage. Classic beat 'em up, can't go wrong. Whether you want this one or the Super Nintendo version, it's really more personal preference. Mega Turrican. Basically, an interesting little shooter title there. I can't remember exactly. I think I got this from Buy Mine Sell Yours, that sounds about right. Not something I see too often. These next two shouldn't surprise you. The original Mortal Kombat for Genesis, realistically at that time the better of the ports available, and Mortal Kombat 2. Seriously, if you see me running around with the various ninja suits, you'd be more surprised if I didn't have these games. NHLPA Hockey 93. Honestly, I just picked it up for a few bucks. Just a bit of a gag there. Found it funny, so why not? Pitfall the Mine Adventure. I don't know why I have this one. I must have just picked it up for cheap. Honestly, not something I've really spent a lot of time playing. Speaking of things I probably picked up for cheap, Pit Fighter for the Genesis. To my understanding, this is actually a better port than the Super Nintendo version, at least what I've been informed. I haven't played too much of it, and especially none of the Super Nintendo version, so I can't really tell you. The Revenge of Shinobi. I believe the version of this game I actually have on me is the version 1.0, which for those interested, basically, the version differences for this game is that the original one has basically a lot of unlicensed cameos based off of movie properties, TV show properties. So you see random things like Rambo show up, Spider-Man, Batman, Terminator, a Hulk knockoff at some point. I believe those two were part of the same boss fight, technically. Which, a lot of these things got edited out in later versions of the game. Except for Spider-Man, which took a few iterations to be removed because they actually did manage to get a little bit of a license set up because of a Spider-Man game they did, so they got Spider-Man officially licensed for at least a few versions. Alright. The original Road Rash. I remember actually my family picking this up during a trip to Ottawa many moons back. Not sure whatever happened to the original copy, so I went out of my way to find a box complete copy later down the line once I really started rebuilding my collection. Road Rash 3, not a bad game by any means. I'm honestly just more attached to the original just because that's the one I have more memories of. Rolling Thunder 3, part of the Rolling Thunder series of games. The original began in the arcade there. Overall, fun times. Let's see if I can't get this one out here. Saturday Night Slam Masters. Now, for those that watch my previous videos, you already know that I have the Super Nintendo version of the game. Realistically, the graphics in this one did take a bit of a dive, but it also has an extra mode with, I believe, the deathmatch mode being exclusive to that particular mode, or this particular console. Separation Anxiety, the sequel to Maximum Carnage. Graphics are a little dumbed down. The gameplay is actually... it's actually a weaker game, I'd say, in some respects compared to Maximum Carnage over here. But it's interesting for something to pull out every now and then. You can have a Genesis collection without it having at least one Sonic game. Usually the original. Later on, of course, you can... a lot of them came with the Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This being one of the not-for-resale versions. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, one of the classics. Possibly I'd actually consider this one slightly better than 2. Although I would still play 2 more often just because that's the one I played the hell out of when I was younger. Sonic Spinball. Not a great game by any means, but hey, if I'm getting these many Sonic games, why the hell not? Street Fighter 2 Special Championship Edition. This particular game is a bit of a quirky title because it was basically meant to fill in for both Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Championship Edition all in the same cartridge. Bit of a weird thing to do, but hey, why not? Alright, the next 3 here belong to one of my favorite Genesis... excuse me, I can't talk right now at this point. The caffeine has worn off. One of my favorite Genesis-based series, the Streets of Rage series, otherwise known as Bare Knuckle. So I have the original game here. Basically, honestly, you can't go wrong with this. Not too long ago, my brother actually picked up a vinyl pressing of the Streets of Rage soundtrack that was, I believe, made by I Am 8-Bit, off the top of my head. If someone happens to know, please correct me on that one, or confirm, either or. So, definitely, that's something interesting. I might want to give it a listen to once around his neck of the woods next time. This next one is Streets of Rage 2. Generally speaking, also one of my favorite games. If you would ask me which game I would probably be able to play for a long time without getting bored, here's your game. Honestly, probably the best one of the trilogy. This particular copy was actually signed by Hitoshi Ariga, who, for those that aren't familiar, is the artist that's behind the Rockman Megamix and Rockman Gigamix manga series, the main artist for that. But also on top of that, he was actually one of the dot artists for this particular game. So basically, when he showed up at the Fan Expo quite a few years back at this point, I took the opportunity to bring this over there along with one of the available translated versions of Megamix in order to get that signed. He was actually rather surprised to see that. And the last one I have here is Streets of Rage 3, which it's not a bad game per se. It's just this is a kind of a tweaked and a bit of a weaker title compared to Bare Knuckle 3, which generally, in this case, has more censorship than Bare Knuckle 3, by removing a sub-boss along with some other small changes here and there, mostly female enemy costumes and such. But also they tweaked the difficulty, which made this one a more difficult game in general, and basically just removed some other content here and there, such as Ash, which was a sub-boss that's available in the first game, or the first real level overall, which is basically your gay stereotype, which I can understand why they removed it for North American markets. Alright, Subterranea. Honestly, I haven't had the chance to play this one, so I can't comment on this one too much yet. Seemed like an interesting enough game. I've heard interesting things about it. Next one up, it's a bit of a beat-up case, but Tasmania. It's this one I remember playing a bits and pieces, or was it the Taz in Outer Space one? I don't remember. I think it was the Taz in Outer Space one. Either way, generally Taz. Can't go wrong with that one. Top Gear 2. One of the other few, basically. Anything that's based off of more of a classic arcade style racing thing, I'm willing to take a look at. So hey, why not? Alright, next one, Electronic Arts, Urban Strike, the sequel to Jungle Strike. Kind of speaks for itself on that one. Generally more of the same thing, but that's not necessarily a bad thing per se. Vector Man 2. I have nothing to add towards this particular title, although it's nice to have it in my collection. It's just more a general comment in terms of, you notice how most of the older games have the nice plastic casing to them, but at some point Sega claimed it to do it for environmental reasons, basically more environmentally friendly packaging, but basically they just cheaped out on the plastic packaging. So I really need to get like some plastic protectors for these ones that are in just standard cardboard, just because it's a lot more flimsy and I feel I'm going to damage these things a lot more, or have the potential to. So basically that's an issue I need to do with Vector Man, Urban Strike, Comic Zone, and there's at least one or two other things which I actually picked up very recently, in fact today, or the day before, that I need to address to. But we'll look at that a little bit later. Anyhow, going back here, we have Virtua Racing. Generally itself, one of the few examples of kind of 3D, or at least mostly 3D on the Genesis setup. Not a bad game, takes some getting used to. The funny story behind why I picked up this one is because back in the day when Blockbuster was doing the whole Blockbuster Video Game Championship, for the Genesis set one year, they happened to include this as one of the games there. I don't remember the other games were off the top of my head. I did better on those other games, but quite frankly, this is what caused me to basically blow the whole thing in my local store entry. Subsequently, my brother was the one who also competing there this year, and this is part of the reason why he got a much better score than I did. Generally, I did so poorly in this, and this is where he made up his ground. And that's all she wrote for that. Alright, World Series Baseball. Like I said, I don't tend to collect a lot of sports titles, but honestly, this is one of the better ones I find, especially in terms of baseball games. I think I actually prefer this rather than the update that they released for, I believe it was World Series Baseball 95. Maybe it's just because this is the one I remember playing more with my brother at the time. Alright, the original X-Men Genesis game. Honestly, it's not the worst game, but it's not exactly a great game either, I'm going to be honest there. It's really the sequel itself which is a much better title that's worth more, or playing. Alright, we're actually going to move towards the rest of my full shelf here is actually boxed Mega Drive games. So starting off, we have Aleste, otherwise known in North American markets as the very expensive Musha. Honestly, this one is just a general by Toplane, a nice kind of a shoot-'em-up title. Can't go wrong with this. I would recommend being able to find this game, but if you want to find it, unfortunately you're going to end up paying for it, especially if you're looking for the North American copy. Buy import if you can help it. Alright, Bare Knuckle. I have an import version of Streets of Rage, basically. The funny part is, this is actually a bit of a pointless purchase in hindsight, because with the way they actually set up the general Genesis library, depending on the BIOS that is actually part of your Genesis system, it'll determine what kind of graphics or what kind of language should be loaded up by the system at the time. So imagine my surprise when I put in my copy of Bare Knuckle, used the Genesis Game Genie as my workaround for that, and when I boot it up, I end up seeing Streets of Rage graphics and everything in English. So kind of a pointless purchase, but hey. But on the bright side, that makes Dai Kamimura, I can never pronounce his name correctly, Dai Makamura, aka Ghosts and Goblins, or no, I believe it's Ghouls and Goblins, load up in English no problem. Not that it was a very language-heavy game, but still. Hokuto no Ken Part 2. Basically, this covers everything after the Rao arc. If you're more familiar with generally Hokuto no Ken 2 for the animated series. Generally speaking, we did get this in the English market, but it was heavily censored, basically to remove any license references and the extreme violence of people blowing up after being punched and kicked. And we got it as the last battle. If you're going to pick up this game, get the... well, you're going to need a little help probably navigating because of the language issues. But generally, you get the original Mega Drive version so you get the uncensored experience. Outrun. Basically a classic arcade-style racing game. Can't go wrong with that. Picked it up for a fair price, not going to argue. Puyo Puyo. I think I got this one for $5. that was a very well spent $5. This game cost me a little more than $5. Tatsujin, otherwise known as Truxton. Anyone who's a fan of classic Game Room knows why that name is important. And the best part is, like I said, this is actually part of the various titles where if you play it, and because of the BIOS setup, it actually loads up Truxton, or the English graphics, so basically it loads it up as Truxton, not Tatsujin. Not that there's a huge language aspect to that particular game anyway. And the last one I have is Whip Rush, which I believe off the top of my head is another shoot-'em-up style game. The Genesis actually had a very large library of shoot-'em-ups, which are all entertaining to play as. Alright, that's everything on my small little shelf here. We're actually going to move over in a minute in order to look to 2 more games which are recently picked up, as well as my loose games for the Genesis library. Alright, we've now moved over to my perennial cleaning table. As you can see, I kind of set everything up here. I have a lot less loose games in terms of Genesis titles, just because it's so much easier to pick up games with the case, so it's easier to kind of keep them that way. Kind of starting off from the front, we have Rolling Thunder 2. I actually have a NES copy of Rolling Thunder, which I believe was... I can never remember what the name of that one company is. Tengen. Yeah, it's basically, that was a Tengen release at the time. So basically unofficially released for the Nintendo system. But everything else kind of came on for the Genesis just fine. So hey, why not? Super Thunderblade, the game itself is a little more on the beat up end. And the manual that I got with this is actually completely unopenable. It's just wrecked. But I didn't exactly pay a lot for it either, so hey, can't go too wrong. Shadow Dancers, The Secret of Shinobi. A bit of a weird entry in the Shinobi series, but hey, interesting enough. Still not too bad to pick up. Let's see if I can get this one. This is actually a Mega Drive game, Puyo Puyo 2. Because I actually have an obscene amount of Puyo Puyo games, if I have to be quite honest. Which we'll see more of, especially when I get to my Saturn collection. When I get there eventually. The Pirates of Dark Water. I believe this game, I have it loosely held here, but my brother originally found this game inside a poorly wrapped, previously played package. Pardon me, I really can't talk at this point of day, I don't know why. Previously played package that used to pop up back in like, in terms of local stores, basically your Kmart's, your Byways, for just kind of a lower end stores. Which is really weird that he actually managed to find one within the past year that was still in that old, previously paid packaging. Alright, this is a Mega Drive game. It stands out a bit in terms of the labeling just because this game is actually a bootleg version of Double Dragon 2 The Revenge. The actual labeling is basically a lot more clean. You'd have the logo here, there, and actually have more of a focus on this part of the graphic. But generally speaking, the one oddity about this particular bootleg that we discovered with D-Tysonator, so you're kind of playing it over in AC Games, is that it seems to have actually fixed one of the problems with the original game, being that when you killed enemies and it played the death sound effect, it would actually basically stall the game, which doesn't appear on this copy, which is kind of weird actually. Alright, Golden Axe is the next one on the lineup there. A classic beat 'em up there. Quite hard arcade style game. And it shows Galaxy Force 2, basically another little shump there. Unfortunately, they put a sticker on the label. It's going to be a pain in the butt to get off if I can even do that. A little worse for wear, but Gunstar Heroes. Can't go wrong with a classic treasure game like that. Strider. Despite the fact the cover has nothing to do with anything in terms of the actual game there, it's a port of the original arcade game that was put on the Genesis there. X-Men 2 Clone Wars. This is actually now my duplicate copy because, as you can see in the background there, I now picked up a box copy of the game fairly recently. I believe I actually got it at Con Pro now that I think about it. And this was my original copy, so now I actually have a backup copy or duplicate, which I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with later. Alright, I really should have put this with Golden Axe, but Golden Axe 2, basically a follow-up to the original title there. Not a bad game, but basically still in your same genre of very hard arcade games. The original Vector Man. I'd like to upgrade this one to box 2 if I can help it later. I'll have to double check what that is in a moment. Hopefully not too related or something like that. Alright. Double Dragon. This one was done by Ballistic. Basically, the reason for the weird cartridge is because I believe it was an unlicensed game. or not, at least non-official. Road Rash 2. When you put that with the other two games there, I actually have the full trilogy here. Generally speaking, I do enjoy the series, one of my favorite things, but I still prefer the first game because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Alright, Midnight Resistance. Once I'm gonna get my fingers out of the way there. I actually would prefer, if I want to see someday if I can get a complete copy of this game. It's a fun little remake or a kind of a port of the original arcade title. I think I actually prefer the music on the Genesis version more than the actual original arcade for the most part. Especially when you have the music that when you're kind of in between rounds or in between stages picking up weapons. It's a lot less annoying without the voices in there. And this one's kind of a weird little oddity, being that this is basically the equivalent to a Japanese bootleg game but stuck into a North American style card. As you can kind of see, labeled 4 and 1. The 4 games it has here would be Golden Axe 2, Fighting Masters, Quackshot, and Bare Knuckle. In most of the games, it has the copyright information for Sega edited out conveniently enough. With, I believe, in Bare Knuckle, instead of being press start and then the Sega information, it says press start, press, and press. Generally speaking, hell, even to show you how odd it is, it's literally kind of a closed-in plastic. There are no bolts or anything. I'm not exactly sure how you could even open this thing to try to get a look at it. Although, really, you don't need to. As long as you clear the actual pins itself, you should be good. Alright, and for the last two things I happen to know off the top of my head. First of all, Clone Wars in an extremely shiny packaging, foiling. This one is actually extra shiny because it actually already came with a little protector there from when I bought it. It was nice that the seller provided that. And the last one, which was actually just picked up today actually, is a complete copy of Sonic and Knuckles. Basically, the fun part for that is, of course, you'd be attaching that to Sonic 2 or Sonic 3 in order to get a Sonic 3 complete. Pardon me, I really can't talk right now. To get a more complete sense of what the original Sonic 3 was supposed to be before they had to cut the whole thing short due to time constraints. And of course, for Sonic 2, in order to add Knuckles to that game with the lock-on technology. There are a couple other things you could do to screw around with that with other games, depending on the codes entered there, but basically it was just weird versions of bonus stage. And I believe with these particular games, including some other recent additions, I am either at 500 games total or just shy of it. I just need to double check my spreadsheet, which I need to punch in the new stuff and to confirm exactly what I have and do not have. But generally speaking, for Genesis collecting here, still a little on the inexpensive end, and I say that loosely really. It's less expensive than collecting for Nintendo or Super Nintendo at this point, by sure. By far, I should really say. But the one thing I want to mention is, in terms of the box setup, it does take up a little bit of space, although it is a bit easier to organize. And at least on the bright side, you can find the box games a lot easier, which is why I have so many less loose games. As you see here, I literally could fit everything in just kind of the one lid for one of my IKEA boxes. Whereas for the Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, and Nintendo games, I have to have multiple boxes because it's quite frankly harder and more expensive to collect them that way. Or collect them in more complete formats. They'd be taking up a lot of space otherwise. Alright. I believe because my camera's actually running really warm at this point, this is a good point to cut things off. Thank you all for watching again. We'll be continuing the series hopefully when I have more time in order to step into more things. Basically, I think I'll be going into more Sega stuff, namely my Saturn collection, which I actually have quite a substantial amount of in terms of import games. So hopefully we'll be talking about that soon. If you have any suggestions of any good Genesis games or Mega Drive games I might be missing though, or might want to take a look at, please leave them in the comments though. I actually rather do enjoy playing stuff for the Genesis. And just, especially with the fun stuff you can do with the sound fonts, just generally fun to listen to. So if there are any great suggestions or anything like that, drop them in the comments. I actually would be really interested in hearing them. So at this point, I really will cut things off. Thank you all for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment. And I shall catch you all later.